A single whispered word could determine who lived and who died. This was the hidden reality for political fugitives in the ancient world, sheltered by a secret network of safe houses that thrived in the shadows of mighty empires. By the end of this, you will understand the brilliant and dangerous system that defied the most powerful rulers in history. How did a simple mark on a tree guide someone to safety across hundreds of miles? And what kind of person would risk everything to hide a perfect stranger? What does true sanctuary look like to you? These were not outlaws hiding from common justice, but minds too dangerous to be left free. The people who needed this network were often the brilliant, the principled, and the inconvenient. Philosophers whose teachings challenged a king's authority, deposed governors who knew too many state secrets, or religious reformers whose followers grew too numerous for the emperor's comfort. Their only crime was holding an idea that threatened the established order. Consider the Roman statesman Cicero, a man whose voice shaped an empire, forced to flee for his life when a new political alliance marked him for death. He was not a thief or a murderer, he was a political opponent. Or picture the Jewish rebels who, after a failed uprising, vanished into the countryside, their very existence a defiance of Roman power. They were hunted not for petty theft, but for the symbolic threat they represented. These fugitives carried something far more valuable than gold. They carried knowledge, influence, and a legacy that someone in power wanted erased. This is why the network had to exist. Protecting a common criminal was one thing, but sheltering a person wanted by the state was an act of treason punishable by death. It required a system built on absolute secrecy and profound trust, starting with the most vulnerable point of contact, the first safe house. The first glimmers of this system appeared not in marble forums, but in sun-baked mud brick. In the sprawling temple complexes of Mesopotamia, a fugitive could find a precarious form of shelter. These sacred spaces, dedicated to gods like Ishtar or Marduk, held a power that even kings were hesitant to violate outright. A political enemy of the crown might flee to such a place, claiming sanctuary under the protection of the divine. This was not an organized network, but a desperate gamble on the power of religious taboo. The temple priests, operating in a gray area between royal command and divine law, could offer a temporary shield. Meanwhile, along the fertile, maze-like branches of the Nile Delta in Egypt, entire villages could become unofficial way stations. When a court official suddenly fell from the pharaoh's grace, the long arm of the state could be surprisingly short. Reaching into every small, tight-knit farming community was nearly impossible. A disgraced vizier or a tax collector who knew too much might simply vanish into one of these villages, sheltered by locals bound by kinship or a shared distrust of the distant capital. These early, fragile systems reveal the core idea at its most basic. They used the landscape itself, the vast distances and difficult terrain, as a primary defense. More importantly, they leveraged social structures, the unbreakable bonds of family or the unassailable authority of a temple, to create pockets of invisibility. This nascent concept of using space and community as a shield was the seed from which far more sophisticated and deliberate networks would later grow across the Mediterranean world. But a fugitive could not live forever within temple walls. This need for movement gave rise to something far more fluid and daring. Beyond the sacred groves, a secular web of protection began to form, connecting the homes of sympathetic citizens. A disgraced Athenian general fleeing a death sentence would not find his name on any public register of safe houses. Instead, his survival depended on a quiet word from a trusted messenger, a pre-arranged signal left on a certain street corner, or the dim lamplight in a specific window that meant it was safe to approach. This human network operated in the shadows of the official religious system, a chain of trust built on shared political beliefs or personal loyalty. A single courier, perhaps a slave considered invisible by the powerful, could carry a sealed message across the city, its contents known only to the sender and the recipient. The message would not name the fugitive or the destination. It might simply contain a line of poetry, a code that confirmed the next link in the chain was ready. This was a system built on silence and subtlety, where a misplaced glance or a moment of hesitation could unravel the entire operation. The Greek model perfected a powerful duality: the inviolable sanctuary for temporary shield and the secret network for sustained escape. It proved that true safety could be woven from both divine law and human courage, a combination that would be tested on an even grander scale. A political enemy in Rome lived on borrowed time measured in hours. The proscription lists nailed to the forum's rostra were more than announcements. They were death warrants, and the entire machinery of the state turned to hunting the names they held. For these marked men, survival demanded more than a sympathetic friend. It required an entire hidden architecture woven into the fabric of Roman society itself. The client-patron system, the very bedrock of social order, became their most powerful shield. A patron, bound by a sacred oath of loyalty to his clients, might orchestrate a breathtakingly bold escape. A disgraced senator, his own townhouse now a prison, could be smuggled out at dusk, not to a distant forest, but into the sprawling, secluded villa of his patron just outside the city walls. Here, within the estate's labyrinthine corridors, he would find his refuge, a Cryptoporticus. This was a semi-subterranean gallery, a long, vaulted passageway built half below ground. Its design was genius, providing cool air and shade for the household in summer, but for a fugitive, it offered something far more precious: absolute concealment. With its limited, easily guarded entrances and muffled acoustics, a man could remain hidden for months, mere feet from the bustling life of the villa above. Yet the ultimate hiding places lay beneath the city itself. The catacombs, those vast networks of tunnels and burial chambers, were a city of the dead that could shelter the living. A fugitive, guided by a trusted slave of the household, could vanish into this dark, silent world. The air was cool and still, the only light coming from the occasional flickering oil lamp. They would move through passages lined with burial niches, the bones of generations silently witnessing their passage. This was not a temporary shelter, it was a subterranean fortress, a maze so complex that entire search parties could pass within yards and never know. This system thrived on a volatile mix of fierce loyalty and cold pragmatism. A patron protected his client out of duty, but also because that client's knowledge or future influence was a valuable asset to be preserved. It was a dangerous gamble where protecting one man could doom an entire family. The Roman network reveals a chilling sophistication, turning the very homes and tombs of the elite into instruments of defiance, proving that sometimes the safest place to hide is in the shadows cast by immense power. A fugitive running for his life could not simply ask for directions. The entire system of safe houses depended on a language of silence, a set of secret signals woven into the fabric of everyday life. Imagine a merchant traveling a well-known trade route, his wagon laden with goods. To most, the painted patterns on its sides were simple decoration. But to a person on the run, a specific arrangement of circles or a certain color stripe was a beacon, silently pointing the way to the next friendly village. An innkeeper might hang a particular type of pot or a bundle of herbs outside their door, a signal that this was a place of shelter for those who knew to look. High in the mountain passes, a shepherd, part of the same human chain, would carve a subtle mark into the bark of an ancient oak tree. This was not graffiti, it was a road sign for the desperate, indicating a clear path or a nearby cave ready for habitation. There were no written lists or drawn maps, as these could be discovered and deciphered. All knowledge was passed by word of mouth, entrusted only to a select few whose loyalty had been proven beyond any doubt. The genius of these codes lay in their beautiful simplicity and complete deniability. If questioned by a soldier, the merchant could honestly say the patterns were for good luck. The innkeeper could claim the herbs were merely drying. The shepherd's mark was just a way to mark his territory. There was nothing to confess because the evidence was invisible to anyone outside the conspiracy. This covert communication was the nervous system of the entire operation, a silent, pulsing web of information that guided the hunted to safety without a single word being spoken. But once a signal was understood, where did it lead? The choice of a refuge was as deliberate as the code that revealed it, selected for its ability to make a person vanish from the world. The geography surrounding a safe house was its silent guardian. Far from the crowded city, an isolated farmstead offered more than just shelter. It provided a clear, unobstructed view for miles. Anyone approaching could be seen long before they arrived, giving a hidden guest precious time to retreat into a concealed cellar or a hidden room behind a grain store. These remote locations were chosen with a brilliant duality in mind. They needed to be close enough to a major Roman road or a well-traveled path to allow for a relatively swift arrival under cover of darkness, yet distant enough to avoid the casual, prying eyes of a passing patrol or a curious tax collector. A coastal villa took this principle to its logical extreme. For a fugitive arriving by land, it was a dead end, a trap. But for those who knew its secret, that same villa was a gateway to freedom. A private, hidden dock tucked away from the main shore could host a small, fast boat, its crew ready to whisk a passenger away to a waiting ship under the cover of fog or a moonless night. The sea was a road without checkpoints, leading to another province or even another empire entirely. But the most reliable protector was often the untamed land itself. Dense, ancient forests swallowed sound and sight, their canopies blotting out the sun and turning a search party into a disoriented group of individuals. A complex cave system in the rugged highlands was even more effective. One entrance could lead to a dozen branching tunnels, a natural labyrinth where a person could hide for weeks with a supply of fresh water and dried food. The very ground under the pursuers' feet was hollow, a fact they might never realize. The individuals who selected these locations were not just finding a hiding spot, they were thinking like military strategists. They understood that a steep, rocky climb, a treacherous swamp, or a narrow mountain pass acted as a force multiplier, exhausting and demoralizing any organized pursuit. The environment was the first and most formidable line of defense. It was a shield that required no maintenance and whose loyalty could never be bought. Yet, even the most perfectly located refuge was useless without the one element that gave it life: the people willing to defy an empire from within their own homes. The sanctity of a monastery wall was a shield no soldier dared to breach lightly. This unspoken rule transformed religious institutions across the ancient world into some of the most resilient nodes in the entire hidden network. Far beyond the formal Greek tradition of Asylum, a Buddhist monastery nestled in a Silk Road mountain pass offered more than just spiritual solace to a weary merchant. For a political exile fleeing a vengeful Khan, its prayer halls became a fortress, its perceived divine protection a powerful deterrent against pursuers who feared provoking the gods. This was not merely a hiding place, it was a sanctuary where the authority of a king met the higher law of the divine, and often the king would pause. In Rome, the early Christian catacombs, those vast cities of the dead, served a dual purpose for the living. While they hid the faithful from persecution, their labyrinthine tunnels also sheltered senators and officials who had fallen out of favor with the current emperor. The state's reluctance to desecrate burial grounds created a perfect, shadowy refuge. Similarly, a remote Zoroastrian fire temple, its eternal flame a beacon in the desert night, could offer a safe harbor to a noble fleeing a dynastic coup in Persia. The very isolation that defined these places, chosen for contemplation and separation from the world, made them ideal for concealment, but their role went far beyond passive shelter. The monks and priests who inhabited these spaces were the network's most effective agents. A Buddhist monk traveling between monasteries was a common, unremarkable sight, his robes granting him passage through territories where others would be stopped and questioned. He could carry coded messages in a prayer scroll or verbally relay the location of the next safe house, his movements masked by the guise of pilgrimage. A Christian deacon visiting the catacombs to tend to the dead could just as easily be checking on a hidden fugitive and delivering supplies. Their spiritual mission provided the perfect cover for the intensely practical work of scouting routes, assessing threats, and maintaining the fragile lines of communication that kept the entire system alive. This fusion of spiritual authority and clandestine aid created a unique form of resilience. A king might eventually risk storming a noble's villa, but to violently enter a holy site was to challenge the cosmic order and risk the wrath of both the divine and the superstitious populace. The network, by weaving itself into the fabric of faith, gained a layer of protection that was as much psychological as it was physical. It asked a profound question of those in power: how far are you willing to go, and which laws are you willing to break? This spiritual dimension made the safe houses not just places to hide, but sacred ground where the hunted could, for a moment, breathe freely. Yet this sanctuary came with its own heavy price, a burden carried not by the institutions, but by the courageous individuals who operated them. A single decision to open your door could erase your entire life. For the men and women who operated these safe houses, the price of sanctuary was calculated not in gold, but in blood. Under Roman law, the punishment for harboring a proscribed fugitive was absolute execution and the complete confiscation of all property, lands, and wealth. A family that had built its status over generations could be utterly destroyed in a single day, its name erased and its descendants left with nothing. The danger was not an abstract threat. It was the very real possibility of soldiers arriving at dawn, their heavy footsteps a death knell for everyone inside. So why would anyone take such a catastrophic risk? The motivations were as complex as the people themselves. For some, it was a matter of unshakable ideology. A Stoic philosopher who believed in a universal brotherhood of man would see offering shelter as a simple, non-negotiable duty, a direct stand against the injustice of a tyrant. For others, it was the iron bond of personal loyalty. A Roman patron would shield his client not for profit, but because their fates were inextricably linked by a sacred oath, a bond that defined their very honor. And yes, financial reward was a factor for a few. A wealthy exile might pay handsomely for his protection, a sum that could tempt a struggling merchant or a farmer deep in debt. But the most powerful incentive was often the least tangible. A devout Christian family hiding a senator in their catacomb might believe they were performing God's work, storing up treasures in heaven where no Roman soldier could ever reach. The true reward was not a chest of coins, but the profound satisfaction of knowing you had preserved a voice the empire wanted silenced. You had kept an idea alive. This profound commitment demanded an almost superhuman level of personal security. Every member of the household, from the eldest son to the most trusted kitchen slave, had to be part of the secret. A single careless word spoken at the market, a moment of childish gossip, or a nervous glance could unravel everything. The harborers lived in a state of constant, quiet vigilance, their hearts leaping at every unexpected knock on the door, their ears straining for the sound of marching boots on the cobblestones outside. They had to master the art of the perfect lie, delivered with a calm face and a steady hand, while the most wanted person in the province hid just feet away. They were not just providing a room, they were maintaining a flawless performance for their neighbors, their community, and the ever-watchful eyes of the state. They became actors in their own homes, their entire lives a carefully constructed shield for a single, precious secret. The death of Tiberius Gracchus was not the end of his movement, it was the beginning of a desperate hunt. After his body was discarded into the Tiber River, the conservative senators who had killed him turned their fury on his followers. A political purge began, and to be associated with his ideas of land reform was now a death sentence. These were not hardened soldiers, but clerks, orators, and minor officials who had believed in a more equitable distribution of Rome's wealth. With the city gates watched and their homes no longer safe, their only hope lay in the trust of strangers far from the capital. Their escape route led not to grand villas, but to the humble farmsteads of the Italian countryside. A network of plebeian farmers and equestrian businessmen, people who had everything to lose, quietly opened their doors. For these families, sheltering a Gracchus supporter was an act of treason against the Senate itself. Why would a grain merchant in a small town risk his business and his family's lives for an ideal? The answer was written in the very land they worked on. Tiberius Gracchus had fought to break up the massive estates of the aristocracy and give small plots of land to landless veterans. The men and women hiding in their storage cellars and haylofts were not just fugitives, they were the living embodiment of that hope. Protecting them was a way to protect the idea that a common citizen could have a stake in Rome's future. The logistics were terrifyingly simple. A fugitive might be passed from one safe house to another under the cover of night, moving from a farm outside Rome to a coastal settlement. There, a sympathetic ship captain, perhaps one who also believed in the cause or was paid from the Gracchus faction's dwindling coffers, would take them aboard. Crated as cargo or mixed in with the crew, they would set sail for Sicily or the provinces of North Africa, places where the Senate's immediate reach was weaker. This was not a random flight, it was a deliberate, organized exodus. It functioned as an early underground railroad, powered not by royal decrees or religious doctrine, but by a shared political vision. Every person who took that risk, from the farmer who shared his meager bread to the sailor who altered his course, was casting a vote for a different kind of Rome. They were proving that an idea, once unleashed, could not be so easily killed, even when its champion was gone. It found refuge in cellars and crossed seas, carried forward by the courage of ordinary people. The desert sun bleached the bones of Jerusalem, but the fight for its soul was not yet over. After the city fell to the Roman legions in the year 70, the survivors who refused to surrender faced a stark choice: slavery or a desperate flight into the wilderness. For the Jewish rebels and zealots, the arid, unforgiving landscape of the Judean desert became their last, best ally. While the fortress of Masada would later become a legendary symbol of final defiance, it was the countless smaller, hidden cave complexes that formed the true lifeblood of the resistance. These were not grand fortifications, but secret way stations, a network of safe houses carved by nature and desperation into the very cliffs themselves. Reaching one of these caves was a test of courage and local knowledge. The paths were not marked on any Roman map. They were narrow, treacherous goat trails that zigzagged up sheer rock faces, often invisible from the valley floor below. A rebel would have to move at dusk or dawn when the long shadows hid his silhouette, following directions passed in whispers. A specific rock formation that looked like a sleeping lion, a dry riverbed that had to be followed for exactly 1,000 paces. The caves themselves were marvels of natural concealment. Some entrances were tucked behind thorny acacia bushes. Others were accessible only by climbing a fissure in the cliff and squeezing through a narrow opening. Inside, the air was cool and still, a stark contrast to the searing heat outside. These chambers, some large enough to shelter a dozen people, became temporary homes, storage depots, and planning rooms. Their greatest defense was their anonymity. A single hidden cave could evade Roman patrols for years, but a person cannot live on defiance alone. The entire network depended on a silent supply chain. Sympathizers from villages near the desert edge would risk everything to gather supplies: bags of grain, skins of water, dried dates, and salt. Under the cover of darkness, small teams would transport these vital goods into the desert, leaving them at pre-arranged dead drops, a hollow in a specific rock, a buried pottery jar in a wadi. The rebels would then retrieve them, moving like ghosts under the starlight. This system turned the desert from a barren wasteland into a sustained sanctuary. It was a brilliant adaptation, using an environment the Romans saw as a barrier and turning it into a shield. The legions, masters of open-field warfare and siegecraft, were confounded by this formless, elusive resistance. How do you lay siege to a mountain? How do you patrol 1,000 square miles of silent, broken rock? The cave network demonstrated that resilience is not always about strength, but about an intimate knowledge of place and an unbreakable will to remain free, proving that even the most powerful empire could be defied from the shadows. The desert cave was a perfect shield, but it could not produce a single drop of water or a grain of wheat. For a fugitive hidden in a villa's Cryptoporticus or a rebel tucked away in a cliffside grotto, the most immediate danger was not the soldier's sword, but the slow, silent creep of starvation and thirst. Keeping a person alive and healthy in concealment demanded a second, invisible network operating in plain sight, a stealthy supply chain where every delivery was a potential catastrophe. A Roman household, for instance, could not simply double its order for bread, oil, and wine from the local market without inviting uncomfortable questions. The solution was a masterclass in subtlety. Supplies were carefully integrated into the normal rhythm of domestic life. A trusted servant, perhaps the one who managed the household accounts, would deliberately purchase slightly more than the family needed during each trip to the forum. An extra sack of grain, a second amphora of wine, another bundle of dried fish, all absorbed into the apparent consumption of a large, prosperous home. No single purchase would raise an alarm, but over time, the small surplus built a lifeline for the person hidden below. For those in more remote locations, the system relied on the dead drop. A sympathetic farmer might leave a sealed clay pot filled with lentils and salt in the hollow of a specific, lightning-blasted tree at the edge of his property. Under the cover of night, a contact would retrieve it, leaving a small, pre-arranged token of thanks, a polished stone or a carved twig, to signal the package was received. This method ensured the supplier and the fugitive never had to meet, minimizing the risk for both. The geography of the safe house itself was often chosen with this very problem in mind. A remote farmstead was not just isolated, it was often self-sufficient with its own freshwater spring, vegetable garden, and perhaps a small flock of sheep. A coastal villa might have access to a private fishery. The goal was to make the refuge as independent as possible from the outside world. turning the land itself into a silent, uncomplaining provider. Every piece of this logistical puzzle was a calculated risk. The household cook had to account for the missing food without leaving a written record. The servant carrying a tray with extra portions had to maintain a perfectly neutral expression, his heartbeat steady even if a centurion visited on unrelated business. A single misstep, an extra loaf of bread noticed by an observant slave from a neighboring house, or a trail of footprints leading to a dead drop, could unravel months of perfect secrecy. This behind-the-scenes effort, this quiet, daily dance of procurement and distribution, was the true engine of the network. The hiding place offered shelter, but this silent supply chain offered life, a testament to the fact that defiance is not just a moment of courage, but the patient, painstaking work of keeping a flame alive in the deepest dark. Silence was a prison in itself. For the person hidden in a Cryptoporticus or a desert cave, the greatest battle was not fought against soldiers, but within the confines of their own mind. Imagine the reality of a cramped, dark space where you cannot speak, cannot cough, cannot even shift your weight for fear the scrape of sandal on stone might travel through a villa's walls. Your world shrinks to the few square feet around you, and time loses all meaning. The mind, deprived of stimulus and human contact, begins to turn inward, and the silence becomes a canvas for every terrible possibility. Every distant shout from the street could be a search party. Every footstep on the floor above could be the one that leads to your discovery. This was a life ruled by hypervigilance, a state of constant, grinding anxiety that eroded the spirit as surely as any physical hardship. Boredom was not a minor inconvenience, it was a corrosive force. With nothing to read, no one to talk to, and no change of scenery, days blurred into an indistinguishable haze. You were left alone with your thoughts, and for a political fugitive, those thoughts were often a torrent of regret, second-guessing, and fear. Yet, perhaps the heaviest burden was the guilt. You were a living threat to everyone who showed you kindness. The family laughing in the courtyard above, the child playing outside the cave, their lives were now forfeit because of your presence. A single mistake on your part, a single moment of carelessness, would doom them all. This psychological weight required a fortitude that rivaled any physical endurance. How did they endure? Some turned to philosophy, mentally rehearsing the Stoic teachings that taught acceptance of a fate they could not control. Others clung to faith, praying for deliverance or seeing their suffering as a divine test. Many simply focused on the small, tangible markers of time, the sliver of light that moved across the floor each day, the sound of the evening meal being prepared, anything to tether their sanity to a routine. This mental strength was their ultimate, invisible weapon. It was the will to remain motionless and silent while your muscles screamed for release. It was the courage to smother a panic attack in the suffocating dark. It was the resilience to wake up each day not to a life of purpose, but to another 24 hours of confinement and dread, all for the fragile chance of freedom tomorrow. Their story is not just one of political ideals, but of the raw human capacity to endure when hope is the only supply that never runs out. Every smile they offered a neighbor was a carefully constructed lie. The men and women who ran these safe houses lived a relentless double life, their hearts pounding a frantic rhythm beneath a mask of complete calm. While a fugitive faced the terror of confinement, the protector endured the agony of exposure. Their entire world became a stage, and every interaction, from a casual chat at the public baths to haggling with a merchant over the price of olives, was a performance. They had to laugh at the right moments, express the appropriate worries about the harvest or local politics, and maintain the perfect image of a law-abiding citizen, all while the empire's most wanted individual was concealed in a cellar beneath their feet. The smallest slip could mean death, A single nervous glance toward a hidden door, an uncharacteristic purchase of extra food, or a moment of hesitation when asked a direct question by a visiting official could unravel everything. They lived with a constant, low hum of anxiety, their ears perpetually tuned to the sound of marching footsteps or the sudden arrival of unfamiliar horses outside their home. This was not a fleeting fear, but a permanent state of being, a weight that settled on their shoulders and never lifted. So what force could possibly be strong enough to override the most basic human instinct, the drive for self-preservation? For some, it was a deep philosophical conviction, a belief in a universal justice that transcended the laws of any one emperor. For others, it was the fierce, unbreakable bonds of friendship or the sacred duty of a patron to his client, a loyalty that was worth more than life itself. And for many, it was a profound, almost spiritual belief that they were on the right side of a moral chasm, that sheltering a voice for justice was a direct service to their God or to a future, better world. This mindset, this fusion of raw courage and unshakable conviction, was the true bedrock of the entire network. These were not trained spies or soldiers. They were farmers, merchants, and householders who made a conscious, daily choice to defy a superpower. Their resolve was the invisible fortress that no Roman legion could ever breach, the human will that turned ordinary homes into unassailable sanctuaries. The most secure safe houses were hiding in plain sight. Their genius lay not in towering walls or barred gates, but in architectural illusions crafted to fool even the most determined search party. A Roman soldier could march through the main hall of a villa, his eyes scanning for anything out of place, and see only the trappings of a normal, prosperous household. He would never suspect that the very floor he stood on was a cleverly balanced trapdoor, or that the ornate household shrine, the lararium, was a pivoting stone block hiding a narrow staircase descending into darkness. These were not crude holes dug in haste, but masterpieces of integrated design, planned and built by skilled artisans who knew that true concealment required absolute seamlessness. A false wall was the most common trick. It was not a flimsy partition, but a solid, plastered wall built just a foot or two behind a real one, creating a hidden interstitial space. The entrance was often a section of shelving that swung outward on a silent, counterweighted mechanism, its seams disguised by the natural shadows of the stored goods. A person could slip inside, and when the shelf was closed, the wall appeared utterly seamless, the hidden chamber insulated against sound and shielded from prying eyes. But why go to such elaborate, permanent lengths? A temporary hideout under a bed was far too risky for a prolonged stay. The architects of these spaces understood that the best way to hide something was to make it a fundamental, unremarkable part of the structure itself. In a stable, a trapdoor concealed under a layer of straw and dung led to a small, ventilated chamber. The smell and the setting were a perfect deterrent, as no soldier would wish to conduct a thorough search in such a place. Sometimes the ultimate security lay not in a single room, but in a path of escape, a network of tunnels, sometimes only wide enough to crawl through, connected a villa to a neighboring property or a nearby forest. This was the final, desperate option, used only if the main house was breached. The construction of these features was an act of profound secrecy. The owner would commission only the most trusted builders, often spreading the work across different phases or disguising it as routine repairs to avoid raising suspicion. The finished product was a testament to human ingenuity, a home that looked and functioned like any other, yet held a profound, dangerous secret at its core. It was a sanctuary built from cleverness and stone, proving that the mind could build a fortress where the eye saw only a home. A perfectly ordinary life was the only true camouflage. The most resilient safe houses were not remote fortresses, but unremarkable homes on bustling city streets, their doors identical to those of their neighbors. The families inside were masters of a delicate art, performing the mundane rituals of daily existence with flawless consistency. They did not buy more bread or wine than a household of their size would logically consume. They did not suddenly withdraw from public festivals or stop attending the local baths. In fact, they made a point of being seen, of complaining about the weather, of gossiping about local politics, and of celebrating birthdays. Their greatest weapon was their utter normalcy. Every social interaction was a calculated performance designed to deflect curiosity. A harborer might even be the first to loudly complain about the emperor's latest tax, a clever bit of misdirection that painted them as a grumbling but ultimately loyal citizen. They understood that suspicion often falls on those who are too quiet, too withdrawn, or too different. By embedding themselves deeply into the fabric of their community, they made their home the last place anyone would think to look for a fugitive. This required a profound kind of social intelligence, a constant awareness of how every action might be perceived. Could they afford to host a large dinner party without raising eyebrows about their stores of food? Should they send their child to play outside the very room where someone was hidden? Every decision was weighed against the risk of a single, careless observation from a neighbor. The goal was to become socially invisible by being publicly present, to hide a world-shattering secret behind a facade of boring, everyday life. This principle of blending in was a silent, relentless discipline, a performance that never ended, where a single missed cue could bring the entire production to a catastrophic close. This human chain was the most fragile and vital part of the entire system. Each safe house was a single node in a sprawling, invisible web that stretched across provinces, its connections woven from nothing more substantial than trust. The person hiding in the cellar relied on a scout they would never meet, a messenger whose face they would never see, and a boatman who asked no questions. A single courier, for instance, might carry a message from Rome to a port in southern Italy. He did not know the name of the fugitive or the location of the final destination. His task was simply to deliver a seemingly innocent token, a specific type of seashell or a coin with a tiny scratch on the emperor's profile, to a baker in a coastal town. That token was the only signal the baker needed to prepare his boat. This was a network built on compartmentalized knowledge, where no one person held the entire map. The bonds that held this chain together were as varied as the people themselves. In some cases, it was the unbreakable tie of blood, a cousin sheltering a cousin, where loyalty was a given. In others, it was the powerful solidarity of a shared philosophy, where Stoics or early Christians saw themselves as part of a single, transnational community bound by a common truth. Then there were the formal, sacred oaths of the Roman client-patron relationship, a bond so powerful that breaking it was considered a spiritual defilement. The currency of this economy was not gold but faith in one another. This interdependency created immense strength but also profound vulnerability. A single broken link could unravel everything. A messenger captured and tortured might break, revealing the next contact. A boatman, tempted by a reward far greater than his fee, might decide that loyalty had its price. A scout, simply getting sick and failing to appear at a crucial rendezvous, could leave a fugitive stranded and exposed. The entire structure lived or died on the consistency of human character. This created a constant, low-grade tension that hummed through the network, a silent acknowledgement that every new person brought in was a potential point of failure. Yet when it worked, it was a breathtaking display of collective action. Ordinary people from every walk of life were transformed into silent guardians. A shepherd on a hilltop was not just watching his flock, he was watching the road for patrols. A woman drawing water from a well was not just performing a chore, she was listening for gossip about search parties. Their collective vigilance created a form of intelligence that no single spy could ever gather. The true architecture of this sanctuary was not made of stone and hidden doors, but of countless quiet promises kept in the face of terror. Trust was a fortress, but every fortress has a weak point. For all its intricate codes and hidden rooms, the network's most terrifying vulnerability was not a hidden door, but a broken will. Betrayal was the poison that could seep through the tightest seals of loyalty, and its motivations were as human as the courage it sought to undo. A captured scout, subjected to the relentless agony of Roman interrogation, might hold out for hours, even days. But when the pain became an unending fire, the promise of it stopping in exchange for a single name could shatter the strongest resolve. For others, the temptation was not the end of pain, but the start of wealth. A substantial bounty offered by the state could turn a sympathetic neighbor into a calculating informant, the money representing a future far more secure than the dangerous solidarity of the network. Sometimes the motive was even more personal, a simmering jealousy between two families or a political rivalry that had festered for years, now finding its final, lethal resolution in a quiet tip to the authorities. The moment of betrayal was often chillingly simple. A piece of pottery placed in a specific window, a chalk mark on a city gate, a seemingly casual remark to a soldier at the baths. These were the signals that unraveled lives. The consequences were swift, brutal, and absolute. Soldiers would descend upon a safe house not with questions but with drawn swords. The fugitive, discovered in their hidden chamber, was dragged away to a swift execution or a life of slavery in the mines, but the punishment did not end there. Roman justice was deliberately collective. The harborers, the entire family, and even their trusted servants would be seized. The father who offered shelter, the mother who prepared the extra food, the children who had to keep the secret, all faced the same fate: execution. Their property, everything they owned, was confiscated by the state, erasing their lineage and their legacy in a single, devastating blow. The network itself would suffer a localized collapse. Every person connected to that safe house, every messenger who had visited, every supplier who had left a dead drop, would now be in imminent danger, forcing them to flee or go to ground, severing a critical strand in the web of escape. History remembers the names of the betrayed as a stark reminder of these stakes. While specific names are lost to time, the pattern is clear in the fate of many rebel leaders during the Jewish revolts. A charismatic figure, protected by a loyal band of followers in the Judean hills, could only remain hidden as long as every single person in the surrounding villages remained silent. The offer of amnesty or a reward for one man's location could pit a community's survival against its principles, and fear was a powerful argument. The capture of such a leader was often preceded not by a grand battle, but by a quiet, desperate act of treachery from within. This constant, looming possibility of betrayal from any quarter shaped the network's very soul. It mandated the compartmentalization of information, so that no one person could reveal more than a single link. It demanded the endless vetting of new contacts and the heartbreaking suspicion of even long-time associates. Every handshake carried a silent question, every friendly face was a potential mask. This ever-present danger was the shadow that followed every act of courage, a grim reminder that in a world where one word could save a life, another could obliterate an entire family. A hidden economy pulsed just beneath the surface of the empire, a river of coin and goods that kept the entire secret network alive. Food for a dozen mouths in a desert cave, a discreet bribe for a port official to look the other way, payment to a ship captain for a dangerous nighttime voyage, all of this required a steady, untraceable flow of funds. The fugitives themselves were often the first source. A senator on the run might have access to a secret fund managed by a loyal freedman, or gold and jewels hastily retrieved from a trusted friend's house before his own was seized. But these personal resources were finite and quickly drained by the staggering costs of long-term concealment. This is where the silent patrons stepped in, wealthy sympathizers whose power and social standing provided the perfect cover for financial support. A prominent Roman equestrian, for instance, could not openly fund an enemy of the state, but he could engage in a complex series of trade deals. He might purchase a large shipment of olive oil from a merchant in a distant province, a transaction that appeared perfectly legitimate. The profits from that sale, once the oil was resold, would then be quietly funneled to a contact in the network, the original purpose of the trade completely obscured by layers of commerce. Another common method was to disguise the funds as charitable donations. A wealthy matron known for her piety could make a generous public donation to a temple or a burial society. The funds would enter the religious institution's treasury, and a cooperative priest or treasurer who was part of the conspiracy would then redirect a portion of that money to support safe houses, the sacred coffers becoming a covert bank for the hunted. Sometimes the financial support came from beyond the empire's borders. A foreign king, eager to weaken his Roman rival, might see immense strategic value in keeping a popular rebel leader alive and active. His agents would deliver funds through diplomatic pouches or via trusted merchants along the Silk Road, their money fueling a resistance that cost Rome's soldiers treasure and prestige. This financial web was as vulnerable as the human one. A single financial record, a careless comment from a ship's captain about an oddly generous payment, or a slave overhearing a conversation about a mysterious transfer of funds could expose the entire operation. The movement of money had to be as silent and as clever as the movement of people, proving that Sanctuary was not just a matter of courage, but a complex logistical enterprise funded by a shadow economy that defied an empire's reach. The need for Sanctuary is a story written in the languages of 100 lands. Far from the Roman Cryptoporticus, a Chinese scholar sought refuge not in a cellar, but in the serene silence of a bamboo grove. During the brutal dynastic purges of the Qin or Han courts, an official who had written the wrong poem or backed the wrong prince would find himself a hunted man. His escape relied not on a single patron, but on an entire village of sympathetic farmers. These communities, bound by a deep respect for scholarship and a shared resentment of the distant emperor, would seamlessly absorb the fugitive into their midst. He might become a temporary tutor for the village children, his profound knowledge hidden behind the simple lessons of a country schoolmaster, his ink-stained hands now blending with those of the peasants. His safety depended on the collective silence of every soul in the valley, a human wall against the imperial agents searching the countryside. Across the sea in feudal Japan, the network took on a more martial form. A samurai who had lost his lord in a bloody clan war became a ronin, a masterless wanderer with a price on his head. His path to survival often led to the secluded temples of Shugendo monks, ascetic warriors who knew the secret paths through the mountainous wilderness. These holy sites, perched on cliffsides shrouded in mist, were natural fortresses, but the samurai might also find aid from a more shadowy quarter, the ninja clans of Iga and Koga. For these covert operatives, safe houses were a professional necessity. A remote farmhouse, a lakeside shack, or a cave behind a waterfall served as a way station not just for their own agents, but for any ronin whose survival served their clan's political interests. Here, the currency was not always coin, but strategic advantage and the strengthening of a secret alliance. the pattern repeats itself with a compelling consistency, yet each culture imprinted its own unique signature on the concept. Along the stormy coast of Cornwall, the network was woven into the fabric of the sea. Sympathetic fishing villages, their loyalties pitted against the Crown's tax collectors, used hidden coves and smugglers' tunnels to shelter political dissidents alongside barrels of contraband brandy. A fugitive could be moved under cover of darkness from a secret room in a cliffside into a waiting fishing boat, his passage to France arranged by men who knew the treacherous tides like the backs of their own hands. Meanwhile, in the impassable Caucasus Mountains, the very geography became a sanctuary. Entire villages were built into the cliffsides, accessible only by rope ladders or narrow ledges. For a chieftain fleeing a rival tribe or a rebel defying a Persian satrap, these aerial redoubts were perfect safe houses, their locations known only to the local tribes who used the landscape as both home and hereditary shield. From the Japanese temple to the Cornish cove, these disparate systems all answered the same fundamental human need. They prove that the drive to protect the hunted from the powerful is not a quirk of Roman law or Greek philosophy, but a universal instinct. When the weight of an empire or a shogunate came down upon an individual, the human spirit consistently devised a way to create a pocket of safety, a hidden space where a single, dissenting voice could continue to whisper. This global tapestry of defiance raises a profound question about the nature of power itself and where its absolute authority ultimately finds its limit. The blueprint for sanctuary, perfected in antiquity, has been copied and adapted countless times. We see its direct lineage in the most famous freedom network of the modern era, the Underground Railroad. Just as a Roman fugitive followed a mark on a tree, an escaped slave followed a series of quilt patterns hung on a fence or a specific lantern in a window. The safe houses were not Cryptoporticus chambers, but the root cellars and haylofts of sympathetic farmers, the churches of abolitionist congregations. The couriers were not stoic philosophers, but free black men and women and white allies who risked their own freedom to guide others northward. The fundamental structure was identical, a chain of trust and concealed locations, operating in defiance of the law, all to protect a human life deemed property by the state. This pattern of resistance was repeated with chilling familiarity during the Second World War. Across occupied Europe, ordinary citizens once again transformed their homes into way stations for the hunted. They sheltered Jewish families, downed Allied pilots and political dissidents, using the same tactics of secret rooms, coded messages, and silent supply chains that would have been perfectly understood by a Roman patron or a Judean rebel. The names and technologies changed, but the core principles of secure communication, compartmentalized knowledge, and absolute personal courage remained the enduring constants. Today, this ancient legacy continues in the shadows. Modern safe houses shelter journalists exposing corruption, human rights activists fleeing authoritarian regimes, and whistleblowers who have revealed uncomfortable truths. The methods have been refined with digital encryption and burner phones, yet the human element is unchanged. A trusted contact still meets a car at a dark intersection. A sympathetic household still prepares a spare room, and the entire operation still depends on a network of people willing to face grave consequences for a shared ideal. Recognizing this unbroken thread from the ancient world to our own does more than just satisfy historical curiosity. It reframes the struggle for freedom not as a series of isolated events, but as a continuous human response to oppression. The past offers us a profound blueprint, a testament to the fact that when power seeks to silence a voice, the human spirit will always find a way to build a hidden room, whisper a password, and keep that voice alive. The romantic image of a fugitive resting in a candlelit library behind a bookcase is a powerful fiction. The truth was far more grim and infinitely more demanding. For every cleverly pivoting lararium, there were a dozen hiding places that were little more than damp holes in the ground. An attic space in the summer could become an oven, the air thick and suffocating, while a cellar in the winter was a tomb of biting cold. The reality was the constant scent of damp earth, the scuttling of insects in the dark, and the relentless ache of muscles forced into stillness for hours on end. This was not a life of intrigue, but one of profound physical discomfort and psychological strain. The people who opened their doors were not all paragons of virtue acting from pure ideological fire. A farmer might be coerced into compliance by local rebel leaders, his choice not between right and wrong, but between immediate danger and potential future retribution. A merchant might take in a fugitive for a hefty bag of silver, his motivation rooted in pragmatism, not philosophy. The network survived on this mix of the heroic, the reluctant, and the mercenary, a messy human ecosystem that pure idealism could never have sustained. Later legends often smooth out these rough, complicated edges, turning desperate acts into noble sagas. The real achievement becomes clear only when we strip away the folklore. It is far more impressive to learn that a person endured months in a cramped, airless space, or that a family resisted the temptation of a reward despite their own poverty, than to believe in a sanitized Hollywood version of events. The true power of this history lies not in mythic perfection, but in the flawed, fearful, and yet astonishingly resilient humanity that made it possible. Silent stones hold secrets the written record dared not keep. In the ruins of a Pompeian villa, sealed for centuries by volcanic ash, archaeologists cleared away the pumice and found a perfectly preserved home, complete with a hidden chamber. This was not a storage room. It was a windowless space, its entrance concealed behind a moving section of the main wall's fresco, a space just large enough for a person to wait in utter silence while the world outside ended. This physical evidence, this deliberate architectural deceit, confirms what texts only imply. Across the ancient world, similar discoveries give voice to the hidden. In Egypt, a tomb built for a nobleman in the Valley of the Kings shows signs of later, desperate occupation. Centuries after the pharaoh was laid to rest, someone broke through a false wall in the deepest chamber, creating a tiny, stifling room. Scratches on the stone and the remains of a small fire suggest a political refugee, perhaps a rival priest or a disgraced official, used the sanctity of the dead as his final shield, hiding in the one place the living were most reluctant to go. The most compelling evidence comes from the Judean desert caves. Excavations there have uncovered more than just the bones of rebels. They found entire domestic scenes frozen in time. Storage jars that once held grain, fragments of woven baskets, leather sandals worn thin by use, and even the small, personal items a family would grab when fleeing their home, a bronze cosmetic spoon, a child's toy. These were not temporary camps, but places where people lived for months, even years, their entire existence reduced to what they could carry and hide. They left behind a silent testament to a life of sustained fear and resilience. Even official inscriptions whisper of this covert world. A Greek temple might proudly display a public decree granting it Asylum, the right of inviolable sanctuary. This was not just a religious formality, it was a legally recognized safe zone, a public acknowledgement of the ancient understanding that some spaces must exist beyond the reach of secular power. When we stand in that hidden Pompeian room or hold a Roman lamp found deep in a desert cave, we are touching the very fabric of the network. These artifacts transform speculation into a tangible, breathless reality. They are the cold walls someone leaned against in the dark, the lamp that gave them a sliver of light, the jar that held their last bit of water. The stones do not speak of grand battles or imperial decrees, but of the quiet, desperate, and ultimately hopeful act of waiting for a chance to live. A profound moral chasm lay at the heart of every decision to open that hidden door. For the men and women sheltering a fugitive, the law was not a sacred guide but a weapon wielded by a tyrant. They lived the timeless ethical conflict between civic obedience and a higher, unwritten justice. Ancient philosophers like Socrates grappled with this very tension, debating whether one must always obey the state or if there is a divine or natural law that supersedes human decrees. A Roman harborer watching soldiers march past his home was not simply breaking a rule, he was making a conscious choice about which authority he would ultimately serve. His civic duty demanded he turn the hunted man over to the state. His conscience, his belief in a universal morality, demanded he offer shelter. This was not an abstract debate for them. It was a daily, gut-wrenching reality where the wrong choice meant death. Their actions were often justified by a powerful belief in a justice that transcended the whims of any single emperor. They saw the fugitive not as a criminal, but as a victim of an unjust system, a man whose only crime was speaking a truth the powerful did not want to hear. This moral calculus forced them to weigh the rule of man against the rule of a perceived natural law. Was it right to uphold a law that was fundamentally corrupt? For a Stoic, the answer was clear: virtue and justice were the highest goods, and a law that violated them held no moral power. A devout Christian might see the fugitive as a neighbor, a fellow human being deserving of compassion, following a commandment that transcended any imperial edict. This dilemma forces us to consider the very nature of law and conscience. Where does our true duty lie when the law itself becomes an instrument of oppression? The story of these networks is not just one of secret rooms and coded messages. It is a centuries-old testament to the human capacity for moral courage, a reminder that sometimes the most lawful act is to stand against the law itself. The final destination shimmered like a mirage, a place where the fugitive could finally stop looking over their shoulder. This was not a single safe house, but an entire territory, a rival empire like Parthia for a Roman exile, or a remote Greek polis that valued its independence over appeasing a distant emperor. Reaching this sanctuary was the entire purpose of the network, a perilous pilgrimage where each safe house was merely a stepping stone, a place to catch a breath before the next, more dangerous leg of the journey. The entire human chain existed to facilitate this slow, deliberate migration from the heart of power to the edges of the map. Every step was a gamble, a test of endurance and the unproven reliability of the next contact. A fugitive might spend weeks in a comfortable villa, only to be handed off to a rugged mountain guide they had never met, trusting their life to that man's knowledge of the treacherous paths and his ability to keep a secret. They would travel under the cover of darkness through landscapes that offered no comfort, their progress measured in whispered passwords and the silent hope that the next door would indeed open when they knocked. But the final leg of this journey was almost always the most dangerous, whether it was a dash across a patrolled border, a clandestine boarding of a ship in a watched harbor, or a journey through a narrow mountain pass known to be crawling with scouts. This was the moment where the entire fragile conspiracy was most exposed. Success meant freedom, but failure, after so much effort and risk, meant a capture that would be made into a brutal public example. This hidden network of ancient safe houses stands as a powerful testament to human courage, ingenuity, and the enduring desire for freedom. From the sacred temples of Greece to the hidden chambers of Rome, ordinary people created extraordinary systems of protection against overwhelming power. These were not the actions of kings or generals, but of farmers, householders, and priests who chose to build a wall of silence where no physical wall could stand. They remind us that history is not only written on battlefields and in Senate chambers, but also in the quiet, darkened rooms where a single act of defiance kept a flame of hope alive. These stories show us that compassion and resistance have often flourished in the shadows, a quiet counterpoint to the loud proclamations of empires. It was a resilience built not on force, but on the unshakable bonds of trust and a shared belief in a higher justice. As we reflect on these clandestine chapters of our past, consider the timeless values they represent. The next time you walk through an ancient ruin or read a name from a forgotten list, remember the unseen architecture of Sanctuary that once pulsed beneath the surface of the official world. If you found this exploration of secret histories compelling, subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of the past and share your thoughts on these unsung heroes in the comments below. That hidden room with its cold stone and stifling air has long outlived the bricks that formed it. These spaces have transcended their original purpose, becoming something far more potent in our collective imagination. A safe house is no longer just a historical location. It is a universal symbol for the defiant spark of humanity in an oppressive dark. It represents the profound truth that even under the most watchful eye of tyranny, ordinary people can construct an infrastructure of hope. This symbolic power is why their legacy refuses to be trapped in the pages of history books. It bleeds into our stories and our art, shaping how we understand courage and resilience. Think of the countless tales where a humble cottage in the woods, a quiet apartment in the city, or a hidden chamber in a castle becomes a pivotal sanctuary. These are modern echoes of the ancient Cryptoporticus and the desert cave. They tap into that deep, primal recognition that safety can be found in the most unexpected places, built not by kings, but by the kindness of strangers. The safe house endures not as a ruined wall, but as an everlasting ideal. It is the promise that when a voice is threatened with silence, a door will open in the shadows, a light will be left in a window, and a space will be made at the table. It is the belief that sanctuary is a fundamental human need, and that providing it is one of our highest callings. This symbol challenges us across the centuries, asking what we would be willing to hide and who we would be willing to protect when the world outside grows dark.